Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and welcome back to another episode of Candid Hour at HIC. Let me begin by sharing with you a saying that we've all heard while growing up, and that is, seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. So I was recently having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he was telling me about all the problems he's having answering questions regarding careers with his son who is recently graduating from high school. As a result, we wanted to tap into our community resources by interviewing professionals within their respective fields and providing their insights to the community so that everyone can make an informed decision. And on that note, our guest for today is Brother Mohamedrafik Somji. Mohamedrafik, please introduce yourself.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohamedrafik. Thank you for having me. I work as an attorney in the field of construction defect litigation. I represent the interests of contractors and subcontractors that have usually been sued by either the homeowner or the builder of a single-family home or a townhome community. Usually, the allegations are from the homeowner themselves or the homeowners association against the builder of the community or the home, pertaining to violations of the Florida Building Code, defective and deficient construction that the builder tends to bring every other subcontractor that ever touched the property. So oftentimes I represent subcontractors in what really are frivolous claims against my client. In other cases, I have subcontractors that have some sort of exposure or liability, and the crux of my job revolves around assessing risk and reporting back to my client regarding whether or not we should fight this tooth and nail to try and get the matter disposed of via dismissal against my client, or otherwise advise them of the risk and advise them to settle early and often so as to avoid a much worse outcome down the line through trial and a judgment.
That seems very interesting. So most people know criminal defense lawyers or personal injury lawyers. Can you speak to a little bit about the difference there is with regards to all these different fields within law?
Yeah, the field of law is extremely broad, of which there are criminal defense attorneys and other attorneys who earn a bad rep. I'm here to tell you that that part is true. There are some who will abuse their position as servants of the court, which is what we're supposed to be. But I truly believe that that is often the case in many careers across the spectrum. Wherever you look, you will find fraud, and it's unfortunate that as servants of the court, there are attorneys out there that will lie and bend the truth to a point where they are protecting the interests of their clients at the expense of justice.
That's a very fair point. I think you did highlight that there are obviously bad apples for every profession, so to speak. So one of the common things that that happens is me as a pharmacist, I get called a pill pusher, and you're an ambulance chaser. So how do you sort of reconcile that idea and the one that, as a lawyer being an honorary profession, how do you reconcile those ideas?
Well, I can state on the record that I don't chase ambulances. I work in the field of construction, and part of the reason I do that is it is an area in which I didn't feel like I had to compromise my values, my morals, and who I am. And it allows me to stay on the civil side of things, so I avoid criminal defense where I feel like I may be hired to protect the interests of a guilty party. That's not something I want to put myself through. That's not something I want to do, and that's not something that would facilitate me sleeping at night, which matters to me.
Of course.
I look at it more as an opportunity to go into the very arena in which justice is effectuated and do the right thing. And what I mean by that is I do my job by advising my client the way I see this case going down. I don't try and sell a dream to my client. If I see no exposure or liability, I tell my client, let's fight this thing. And if I see exposure or liability, I advise my client that, hey, we're going to have to pay some money to get out of this thing. There's evidence implicating your scope of work. And a lot of times, you have the opportunity at the very inception of a case on whether or not you want to take the case or not. So this idea that you take the client and you represent them all the way through, do whatever it takes to make sure you get that victory, that I'm not sure that's wholly true, because like I said, you have the opportunity at the onset of the case to accept or not accept that client, or halfway through a case even, if you find there to be irreconcilable differences between you and the client. In fact, it is your duty to withdraw as your client's attorney, provided the client is not prejudiced.
Interesting. So I think one of the, misconceptions that's there is that lawyers, they bend the truth and try and to get the outcome that they're looking for so that they can get paid. I'm pretty sure you've heard that before. So what would you have to say to that kind of a comment?
When I passed the bar and I took an oath to be a servant of the court, I agreed to zealously advocate for my client. And that word zeal means having energy and enthusiasm in pursuit of a particular course or objective. Now, it's important to note here that I'm not the judge, nor am I the jury. It is not my job to speak every fact so as to clear the record of anything and everything that transpired throughout the events of the case. It is my job to advise my client and advocate for my client on the facts that aid my client. It is the other attorney's job to make sure he points out the facts that hurt my client.
So would it be fair to say that the kind of attorney that you have, or the one that represents you in your case, is important?
Absolutely. I think you need to be able to see eye to eye with your client. I think your client needs to understand what you stand for and what you are willing to do in order to get that result. Because I'll tell you now, if a client comes to me expecting me to lie for them, that's not something that's acceptable to me. But although I may not be willing to lie for them, they can all but guarantee that I will put everything I have in me into protecting their interests the right way. And that is possible. There are attorneys out there, in fact, those that I find myself learning most from are those attorneys that do it the right way, and they are out there.
It seems, it's interesting because normally you would hear, attorneys trying to sort of bend the truth. But in your case, you're actually sort of almost struggling with the truth. You're trying to figure out whether this is even the right thing to do in the first place. So I find that quite interesting. So what would you say are your goals going forward? Like, where do you see yourself within the next 10 years or so?
10 years is a long time.
Of course.
But inshallah, if everything continues to go well, I have one of my brothers, Muhammad Hadi, plans on going through law school. I look forward to the opportunity to one day start a law firm with Mohammed Hadi.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah,
if
I
it
think
ever
so
gets
too.
to it,
I
yeah.
think we would make it a point to be an asset to this community in particular.
Yeah, I think it's not a field that's very well represented within our community.
Sure.
So I'm sure people have walked up to you and told you, "Hey, Mohamedrafik, I have this matter. Can you help me?" What do you do? How do you handle those?
Well, I do everything I can to try and help the people asking. What I need to get better at doing is actually turning around and telling them, I don't know the answer to your question. Everyone wants to know the answer to the questions presented. But sometimes it's okay to say you don't know.
Yeah.
In fact, you may end up doing the person asking more of a favor by telling them you don't know, but that you may be able to refer them to someone who may be able to help, instead of trying to take on something you either don't have the time for and won't be able to zealously advocate for, or it being something not in your wheelhouse at all and you're not giving good legal advice. And neither of those are acceptable to me. So I personally am working on getting better at saying I don't know.
If I can take a chapter out of your book, I just probably say I plead the fifth, you know. So anyways, moving along, I think you've mentioned or you've highlighted all these different areas that are there within law. What other opportunities can lawyers have with that JD degree?
One of the reasons learning the law was so palatable to me was the fact that I would never have to practice as an attorney for that degree to help me. And among the most important things I would say going through law school, I would say that the command it gave me over the English language is something I treasure, is something I use in everyday life, and is something I would wish upon many other members of our community, because in the country, in the side of the world we live in the country we live in, every agreement that's been reduced to writing, most every agreement that's been reduced to writing is usually in English.
Right.
And although we speak it, we're fluent, but do we really have command over it? And I would say I don't yet have command over it. But by going through law school, I would say I was granted the opportunity and the privilege to really take a deep dive into having that command that I feel so many others would benefit from. On top of that, it's worth mentioning that the degree itself, it goes hand in hand with just about anything else. There's JD MBAs, JD LLMs in taxation, JD MDs. You get a JD MD, you're untouchable. It doesn't end. You can, if practicing law is not your ultimate calling, you can still benefit a tremendous amount by just going through law school. It's not for everybody, but you also don't need to be a litigator in order to take advantage of the degree.
I think that's a very important point that you highlighted there. In essence, I as a pharmacist can actually go and take a law degree, right? It's an advanced degree. So I could have my regular degree and then still go for an advanced placement, which is taking up this JD, basically.
And I'll tell you one thing, sorry to cut you off,
Sure.
but should you do that, Big Pharma would be willing to pay you a lot of money.
That's true, something to consider.
Yeah.
Talking about degrees, you watch Suits?
I did, yes.
So,
No, don't
yes,
do it.
you know where we're going.
No, do it.
So who do you see yourself as? Are you from any of those characters on Suits?
I looked up to Mike Ross minus the fraud.
Oh man, what was it about Mike that was so intriguing?
He obviously didn't have the swagger that Harvey had,
Right.
but he also had the compassion. He was willing to blend his raw talent with compassion to achieve his client's desired results. And that's ultimately what I wish to accomplish.
He was being human.
He also had a photographic memory.
He did. So talking about degrees, because we know he didn't have one, how, for somebody that, wants to get a law degree, what does it take? Like, can you walk us through some of the steps that are there in getting that degree?
Certainly. But before I do,
Sure.
I want to make it very clear that if what you see in suits is what you're expecting after graduating law school, it's likely not going to happen, okay? You're probably not going to get your paralegal like Rachel Zane to fall in love with you, and you're not going to come up with brilliant solutions at the 11th hour. So if that's what you're expecting, look elsewhere. Now,
I think that statement or that caution goes with any show, right? With any profession.
Yeah.
I think it applies, but I think it's very important to mention that as well.
as far as the process, before applying to law school, you do need to have a 4-year degree, and you do need to take the LSAT, which is an aptitude exam prior to getting admitted to law school.
So just to interject there, do I need a certain kind of degree? So for example, when I did pharmacy school, I had to get some prerequisites just so that I could actually take the PCATs, which I think is similar to the LSATs for lawyers.
Right.
So are there any of these prerequisites prior to you taking the LSAT?
No. However, if at a very early point in your college career, you know for sure that, say, you want to practice healthcare law, you know it, that's your calling, that's your goal, then yeah, you could take some courses geared towards healthcare law that would ease the growing pains when you do initially start learning the law component of healthcare law and you have a little bit of background as far as the technical components associated with the field of law in which you wish to practice. But most importantly, I can't emphasize enough what a high GPA and as high an LSAT score as you can possibly get will do for your chances in getting into a quality law school.
Okay, so before we get to, a little bit about the details regarding the LSAT, what made you want to become a lawyer?
Well, I will say there was no aha moment.
Okay.
There was no injustice I witnessed that I decided to quit my current major and switch to the law for. No, there was nothing like that. For starters, and let me quickly get this out of the way, it is a job that I thought I could do well enough without feeling the moral predicaments associated with jobs in which you sometimes earn a high paycheck. So this was a job that I thought I could do very well, provide for my family, and live comfortably, all the while having the opportunity to go to work and do the right thing every day. So there was that. Second, the prestige associated with being an attorney. I'm wearing this, I hate putting it on, but once it's on and once I go to work, I walk with an extra degree of confidence because I feel like a professional. What I do at work is that of work being done by a professional. The command over the English language, and those would be my reasons.
Okay. And I think it's important to highlight this as well, because we watch so many movies, and you have those, in the movies you'll see those aha moments, somebody watching, a person get abused, and they're like, I'm gonna, quit what I'm doing right now and go and take a law degree so that I can help them. And those people are out there. I'm not discarding any of that, but I think it's also important to realize that at the end of the day, us as individuals that are going through this process, it's okay if we don't have that aha moment. as long as we know what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, if we're willing to work, on them, then we can always, still pursue the degree. So
Absolutely.
I think it's important to highlight that, and I'm glad that you were able to discuss that as well. So coming back to the LSAT now. So you've completed your bachelor's degree, and now you want to go to law school. So you're going to take the LSAT first.
Yes. So one thing of note, most students matriculating through law school don't immediately go from undergrad straight to law school. In fact, the majority of the students in my class in particular had taken multiple years off.
Right.
Multiple years off after undergrad and came back to the law. They came back and entered law school. So it's not something that someone must do immediately coming out of undergrad. It's very common to go out, experience a different career path perhaps, or a career path you like but you think that you could enhance with a JD. And so once you know you're ready to go to law school, whether that's after undergrad or it's after X amount of years in whatever field it is you're working for, then yes, the LSAT comes into play. And one point about the LSAT I have to make is there's these courses out there. There's people that take the LSAT for a living, and they have mastered the test to a point where they're getting perfect scores or darn near perfect scores on back-to-back exams.
Wow.
Because it's an aptitude test and a strategy-based test, it can be beaten. And by taking those courses, you give yourself the best opportunity for a score that would otherwise make the difference between you going into a quality law school to one that would not be considered so. And so although these courses are expensive, if you can afford them, they're well worth the money. And if you can't, there are waivers out there that would allow you to take the LSAT course, allow you to submit, I believe it was 10 applications at the time when I was applying, and pay for your bar exam when you're through law school. And it's a need-based waiver that was available, I should say, and I can't see why it wouldn't be today.
Sure. It's good you highlighted that. So far what I've got is you need a good GPA through your bachelor's degree. Doesn't necessarily matter what degree you get, but as long as you have a very good GPA, and then good scores on the LSAT, which can be aided by these programs that are out there.
Right.
Is there
a couple things I should add is, if you one day intend on practicing patent law, I believe there is a requirement that your undergraduate degree be based in engineering.
Okay.
And the other component to that application process that's very underrated, I would say, would be the letters of recommendation.
Okay.
Those letters of recommendation are the only part of your application that you don't control. Someone else is drafting them.
True.
So it's important that you find a professor or a coach that you have a good rapport with, and you go and you ask them to put a little bit of time and draft something regarding their opinions of why they think you would succeed in the legal field.
Yeah, I think that's important to highlight because even in our field, we had something similar to that. So we've had good scores on, good GPA, good scores on the LSAT, good letters of recommendation. Maybe here or there some other courses that you may need to take. Is there anything else that's needed when you apply for law school?
There's going to be a personal statement.
Okay.
And even if your GPA is not that high, even if your LSAT score is not that high, a good personal statement can go a long way to bridge that gap. So do not be discouraged if you didn't have a great GPA or you didn't have wonderful LSAT scores, because it's still worth applying, because you never know what your story and your personal statement will do to the person on the other side of that desk reading it. If they're moved, you may be in. And the one thing I continue to harp on is perseverance. I was never the smartest kid in my class at any level. My scores were not the highest, but I refused to quit. It was not an option. I failed the bar the first time. Okay, so this is not someone speaking from an ivory tower with a 4.0 GPA and perfect LSAT scores. That's not me. But what perseverance in getting into law school, fighting through law school, and passing the bar exam has taught me will stick with me and will be a part of my work ethic for the remainder of my career.
I think that's a very great thing that you mentioned there. I guess what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?
Indeed.
So once you entered law school, how many years did you spend there? And were there any specific classes that you needed to take, or was it a general law degree?
So it is a general law degree. It's 3 years. The first year and a half, I believe, are going to be all the intro courses: civil procedure, criminal procedure, properties, contracts. Everyone has to take those. But then the remaining year and a half, you get the opportunity to choose your classes to try and tailor the remainder of your education towards what you anticipate you will be practicing in.
Okay, that's interesting. So after that whole process is done, that's when I assume you take the bar exam.
Correct.
And how hard is that?
So where the LSAT is a very difficult aptitude-based exam, this one is more comprehensive and knowledge-based. So whereas that one you can strategize and try and beat, this one you simply have to cram. And there's a lot that you learned over 3 years that you don't remember the night before.
That's true. So what would you say to someone that's, that wants to become a lawyer? What kind of advice would you give them if they're, about to start this process?
Good luck. Everything I've said, you got to keep your chin up. First, you really got to know you want it. You got to know that you want to practice in the field of law. Yeah. Because anyone who tells you that it's not hard work is lying to you. It is. It's hard work from the moment you start studying for your LSAT. And it's hard work through passing the bar. However, what I wish I knew when I started my career as an attorney would be to learn to set your boundaries early. Okay. The way I've been aiming to try and be that zealous advocate for my client, I learned I needed to be that zealous advocate for myself and my loved ones as well. There's going to be firms out there, they will congratulate you, they will pat you on the back, but they're going to go home, and you're going to be expected to stay till 10 p.m. and then go home to your family that may already be sleeping. Yeah. And yes, there will be added benefits, including higher pay, associated with that kind of practice. But once you set your boundaries and you're okay with not making that sum of money because you want to be able to go home and spend time with your wife and help raise your daughter, I'm very much at peace with the fact that today I could be working for a company that may very well be paying me $100,000 more. But I get to set my boundaries. I get to zealously advocate for me and my family, and that's something I think applies across all careers and not just the law.
Sure. I think the idea of work-life balance is probably one of the more important things that gets missed. So why don't you tell us, what a day is like in your profession?
Usually it's going to go 9 to 5:30, sometimes 6. I work 3 out of 5 days in the office. 2 are usually going to be working remote. Now, my day could consist of responding to emails just like everyone else would, but could also involve responding to or drafting correspondence to my client or their adversaries. Could involve drafting a motion. It could involve taking a deposition. It could involve attending mediation and getting closer to trial. There could even be those longer nights, but once you learn to set your boundaries, you limit it to when it has to happen versus it being expected of you on a regular basis.
That's true. I guess you got to set your boundaries early on.
Yeah, early and often.
Interesting. So I guess the other interesting thing that I've seen, at least on social media, is that when COVID happened, the courts were closed in the physical sense, but they were open in the so-called virtual sense. And I think I remember seeing one of those videos where that person became like a cat or something.
Yes. So that was, that is actually on a deposition, and I'm not going to talk about the attorney that looked like a cat, but yes, they did a great job in adapting to the situation in the sense that the courts were already closed, but business had to move on. And so the courts and the judges actually did a great job and the judges oftentimes, these are much more elderly individuals who are far less tech savvy than you and I. So for a 70-year-old judge to hop on a Zoom call where 2 parties that would have otherwise been standing right in front of him are arguing via Zoom, I'll tip my virtual cap to them for that. Now, one thing we have noticed is as we aim to return to some degree of normalcy after COVID, a lot of the virtual trends are still remaining. A lot of mediations and depositions and hearings that I could technically go to the open courthouse for are remaining via Zoom, and that's purely from an efficiency standpoint. And I think it's great in the sense that it keeps all these attorneys from having to drive across the state to different courthouses, to different conference rooms, to bill for that time. That's a lot of wasted resources that now we can all just open up our laptops, and as long as the top half of me looks like it does now, we're good to go.
We're good to go. It's true. It's amazing how we've sort of adapted to this new environment. I think
we've had to.
Yeah, and it's good to see that as well.
One thing I will add is the fact that there was a level of professionalism and a little bit of a scare associated with having to go in front of this elderly judge and this experienced attorney and argue my motion, which I was only halfway confident in, and getting destroyed in person. Now it kind of takes that fear away because he's opening the same computer that I am at his house, and we're arguing, I'm in the comfort of my own home. It took away a little bit of that growth, that the rate at which I found myself growing at while I had to attend in person was a higher rate than that when we are in the comfort of our own homes.
Absolutely. And I think it makes a big difference to be in person and to be in the virtual sense. So I guess one of my very last questions to you would be, if we were to turn back time, would you still be a lawyer?
That's a loaded question. That depends when you ask me. If it's in the middle of a really difficult motion, I would say, absolutely not. But if I look at it holistically, absolutely, yes, I would. Yes, I would. And I would recommend my daughter do the same one day as well.
I'm glad to hear that. Any parting words?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here as well. And hopefully I wish you the very best in your career. And I hope that you've inspired others within the community to take up this field of law.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Mohamedrafik. Somji, it was nice having you, and we had a great conversation. So now we'll be going to a short break before we introduce the next guest.
Subhanallah, 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 Hamdan lillah, Hamdan lillah, Hamdan lillah, Subhanallah, 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 Hamdan lillah, Hamdan lillah, Hamdan lillah, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. كل شمس وقمر وحبيبات المطر سبحت رب البشر. كل شمس وقمر وحبيبات المطر سبحت رب البشر. الرواسي يا إلهي سابحة في هواك، والأنام بك هام حيث لا رب سواك. أي شبر أي قطر لم يبلله نداك، ما احتواك الكون حجما إنما القلب احتواك. نثرت بالعشق نورا ضاء قلبي، أنزلت ماء طهورا ربي ربي، فتقت منه الزهور حار لبي. ما شاء الله ما شاء الله، جلت أسماء فاضت نعمة، لا قوة إلا بالله إلا بالله. حمدا لله، حمدا لله، حمدا لله، سبحان الله، سبحان الله. كل شمس وقمر وحبيبات المطر سبحت رب البشر. كل شمس وقمر وحبيبات سبحت رب البشر. أي عين لم تراك، أي سمع أي فم، أنت منا تتدنى تولج الروح نسام. رحمات واهبات عظمت كيفا وكم، بئس نفس جاحدتك واستلذت بالنعم. أنت العلا والكمال ملء الآفاق.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and welcome back to another segment on Candid Hour. Our next guest is Brother Sikander Nazerali. Brother Sikander, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good to hear. So, Brother Sikander, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional life?
So I work as an actuary at a health insurance company. I've been practicing being an actuary for a little over 15 years, and my primary responsibility at where I work is to help determine health insurance premiums.
So you determine health insurance premiums, is that what I understand?
Correct.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about how you determine these health insurance premiums?
Sure. So in general, an actuary is somebody who quantifies risk. And what I mean by that is, for example, in the case of car insurance, you might see that somebody who is a very risky driver might actually pay a very high premium for their car insurance because they get into a lot of accidents. In contrast, somebody who is a very safe driver may pay a very small premium for their for their car insurance. So the reason, obviously, for this difference is the levels of risk between these two individuals are different. So that's where an actuary comes in and helps determine how much insurance premium that they should pay, and also what factors to consider when determining those premiums. Now, I give the example of car insurance, but actuaries typically work in many kinds of insurance. They also work in life insurance, health insurance, such as what I'm doing. They also may work in homeowners insurance, and the goal there is still the same, where they try and come up with premiums, sufficient premiums, so that an insurance company can have enough money to pay losses when they occur.
Okay, so if I've understood you correctly, what an actuary does is they look at the risk involved in mostly like car insurance, health insurance, homeowners insurance. They look at what the risk is of that individual, and then based on that risk, they provide a dollar amount that we're supposed to pay. So you are probably one of the main reasons why all of us have differing premiums, so to speak.
That is also correct, yes. So in car insurance, clearly somebody who is a safe driver should pay a much less premium than somebody who is a more reckless driver. Now, the way that premiums are determined may actually vary depending on the line of insurance that you work in. Now, if you work in health insurance, there are much more stricter regulations and rules. For example, you can no longer underwrite in the health insurance compared to something that you can do in car insurance. And that is because once the Obamacare was passed, regardless of somebody's health conditions, you cannot charge for that. You have to provide them insurance, regardless of their health conditions. So that means somebody who could usually pay a smaller premium because they were young and healthy must now pay a slightly higher rate to compensate for somebody who's more older and not as healthy.
Ah, I see. So your job is actually was made pretty tough with this new law.
So actually, in some sense, it was made slightly easier.
Oh, okay.
Because now we no longer can differentiate based on somebody's health status. If you worked, on the other hand, in the car insurance, then you would apply more statistical techniques to try and match premiums to somebody's risk profile. In the health insurance, that risk profile is no longer there. But you can still charge somebody depending on their age, which is still a permissible factor in the healthcare field. But you can no longer charge for them based on how sick or not sick they are.
So from what I'm understanding, it almost seems like there's this distinction.
Correct.
Where healthcare goes into its own bucket and then the rest are in another. Is that fair to say?
Yes, so typically there are two main branches of the actuarial profession. You have the life and health, which has been around for a very long time, and you have the casualty. Industry. So the life and health basically forms, things like health insurance premiums, life insurance premiums, and on the casualty side, you have things such as homeowners insurance, automobile insurance, and that sort of stuff.
And from what you said, you are part of the health side of things.
I'm working in the healthcare industry, although I have had approximately 6 years of experience in the casualty side as well, working in workers' compensation.
So what made you an actuary?
So that's a good question. Initially, when I started out, I wasn't really sure which major I wanted to pursue. In fact, I didn't really know what an actuary was, much less what one does. But what I did know was that I really enjoyed taking math and statistic courses. In fact, any coursework that involved numbers, I actually enjoyed and was actually good at them. But at some point, I had to declare a major, and that's when I met with my academic advisor, who then suggested that I look to becoming an actuary. And as I researched the profession, I found that, this could be a really good fit for me. Being an actuary means that you need to have good problem solving and analytical skills. There's a continuous need to learn and develop new skills, and that is something that I'm doing till today. There are also plenty of opportunities to advance in your career. For example, when you typically start out as your job as an actuary, you'll typically be an analyst. But I know many actuaries continue to progress to senior management and eventually even become CEO of the organization. And of course, there are good financial prospects to becoming an actuary. So all of this combined made me want to pursue the actuarial profession. And as I said, I've been in the profession for a little over 15 years, and I'm really glad that I chose it because it is exactly what I wanted it to be, or even hoped it would be.
You seem to be like a very methodical person. Everything is, steps oriented.
Yes.
Do you think that is an important skill to have in this field?
I think that is somewhat of a natural consequence of, liking numbers and liking mathematics, because generally there's a structure in how mathematics flows.
It seems like you're a very, methodical person, and everything involved is in form of like steps, so to speak. Would you say that is an important skill to have as an actuary?
So just by the nature of the profession, because you're working mostly with numbers, there are certain steps or sequences to what you do, and I guess that's just part of the way the profession works. You normally start off with having a lot of data, and then you start applying your math and statistic algorithms to get the desired effect.
So from what I've understood so far is that you would need a very good grasp of math and statistics.
That is correct. So most actuaries starting out should probably have a bachelor's degree in mathematics. That is recommended. Some universities also have an actuarial science degree, and that's what I did when I initially started out. However, having a degree in finance or economic or statistics also works very well. And most candidates usually should have at least 1 to 2 of their preliminary exams passed.
Okay, so as a pharmacist, I would have to go to pharmacy school to actually become a pharmacist. And that's like an advanced degree after you've completed a bachelor's degree. From what you just explained to me, it seems like in actuary there is no sort of advanced degree, but it's more so that you complete your bachelor's degree and then you have a certain set of examinations that you're supposed to take, and then you get or you become an actuary. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that is actually a very accurate statement. Usually, once you're hired as an entry-level actuary position, the company will give you a lot of study time. They will pay for your exam materials. They will send you in exam seminars in an attempt to aid in your preparation for exams. And usually these exams can be intensive. The level of complexity does increase as you go from the lower level exams to the upper level exams. And typically, a person who's starting out in the actual profession can expect to spend between 200 to 500 hours per exam. Now, you will probably get to take 5 to 10 hours of study time at the job, but that still means you have to spend an additional 10 to 20 hours. Again, it can vary from one person to another and from the exam, but that means that you have to be prepared to do extra outside of work
Oh, so,
until you become fully credentialed.
so it seems like there's actually quite a bit of work involved here in just sort of passing those exams.
Yes, so the preliminary level exams, they're more technical in nature, and that sort of fits with, an entry-level person. They're typically doing the technical work, but as you gain more experience, as you progress in your career, you have to become more familiar with the laws and regulations of the line of insurance that you work in, such as I mentioned in the healthcare insurance, where the laws can be more complex. So the upper level exams are more catered to these more complexities, and because at a certain point you want to be able to not do so much the technical work, but if you so choose, you can become more of a manager, more of a leader, and that's what these exams sort of gear you towards.
Okay, so if I was to sort of look at, the process that's involved in becoming an actuary, what I see here is that you need a bachelor's degree.
Correct.
You don't necessarily need one, but it's highly recommended to have one.
Yes.
And in that degree, you want to try and focus on classes that are related to the field, so in like math, advanced math, and
Right.
statistics.
Yes.
And then once you're done with that, you sort of join the job force, and at that point, your employer will give you time to actually study for those exams.
Right.
How many exams are we talking here?
So in total, you're looking at around 10 exams
Wow.
for the healthcare insurance field, and there are around 9 exams on the casualty side as well.
It seems like a very robust field.
So so in general, the time that it takes from start to finish, again, that's something that can vary from one person to another, but you can expect between 5 to 10 years from start to finish to become fully credentialed. Now, even after you're fully credentialed, there's always a need to do continuing education. New methodologies are coming out, the advent of big data, the more computing power, more sophisticated techniques. So you need to keep up with all these emerging technologies, and that's something that you need to do even after you become fully credentialed.
Wow, so there's not only all the time that you've spent just passing the exams, but then there's all this growth that comes
Yes.
that requires all this additional work as well.
Right. Now, fortunately, they're not as intensive as studying for the exams, so you do have a luxury a little bit, that you're not pressured to pass the exams. So, but then again, every profession has its fair share of continuing ed, and the actual profession is no different in that regard.
Sure, that makes sense. So tell me, what would be like a regular day like for you?
So, in addition to the regular, responding to emails and having conversations with different sides of the company, on actuaries' work, typically if they work in your classic insurance company, your primary responsibilities will be to help set premiums. And so, in my case, I'm setting premiums for the health products that we offer. And so there will usually be very certain times of the year where you're very busy. And once that is done, you typically work on projects that, that involves applying some of the skills that you learned, and depending on the goals that your organization has, but still in a very mathematical, in a very statistical fashion.
So let's just take an example, okay? Let's say, you're trying to figure out what the amount is or what the premium is that somebody needs to pay.
Right.
Let's just use health insurance as an example.
Right.
Walk us through some of what you would use to quantify that amount.
So typically when an actuary begins to determine rates for the next year or when the coverage will be in effect, they typically use prior year's data because that's the most relevant thing to use. They may also go as far back as they want, depending on whether they think that using that data would be predictive of future data. However, typically between the time that they use the data to when that coverage will be in effect, they may have to make adjustments because there could be things like coronavirus coming in.
Yeah.
There could be new laws in place. There could be new insurance contracts. For example, say, an insurance company has a contract with a certain hospital to provide hospital services. Well, if the terms of those contracts change and now it becomes more costly to provide those services, well, that's something that an actuary has to incorporate into the rate making process. If also between the time when they collect data and when the rates will be in effect, perhaps they anticipate a rise of a certain kind of disease, they would have to incorporate that into the rate making process.
Also, I think you mentioned something very interesting there with regards to normally the rates being based on what happened the previous year. Obviously,
With some adjustment.
of course, yes, with definitely with adjustments. So as you know, we just went through a whole pandemic.
Right.
We're still, in somewhat of that phase. So how much of that sort of changed the game for you?
As far as the pricing, as far as the natural like day-to-day work goes, so one thing that I will say, and I'm sure most actuaries who work in the healthcare industry will also say that they saw that during the pandemic, people often opted to not do their scheduled surgeries. So something that was important but could be deferred, that actually happened a lot. And so what that meant that there were less losses or less claims in that year. But that also meant that the following year, people would have to come back, and there could be something called pent-up demand or something that they deferred in the past, which they're now going to do. So an actuary using data that had lower level of claims would have to make some kind of adjustment to make sure that the premiums in the future would sort of reflect this pent-up demand and deferred care.
So it seems like there's like a lot of data that's there, that's available, and then you use that data to sort of quantify risk.
Correct.
And then once you have the risk for each individual or each plan, you can assign a dollar amount to that person.
Correct.
And that's the premium that they'll pay.
Correct. That's a very good explanation of what goes on, because an actuary uses data. They have to make sure that the company that they work for, the premium that they charge is sufficient to cover losses. And as you said, different policies could have different benefit designs, right? Some could be very rich, have a very low out-of-pocket. Some could be less rich and have a very high out-of-pocket, right, where those adjustments have to be made. That's where an actuary comes in. And of course, very important is to understand the laws and regulations of the insurance that an actuary works in, so that they are handling the rate-making process correctly.
Okay, so it's very interesting. So I don't know if this applies in the same way, but if you ever watched Moneyball?
I'm familiar with some parts of Moneyball.
Okay, so I'm trying to see if that is something that an actuary would do. Is that a representation of an actuary, or maybe something else?
So that is a similar field. That particular aspect is called data science, and it is related to the actuarial field.
So can you explain to us, maybe just briefly, on sort of the difference between the two, or how there is that interplay?
Sure. So an actuary in general tries to quantify risk on an aggregate basis, and the main purpose of that is to make sure the company is financially solvent. The data scientist, on the other hand, works with large amounts of data, and they're still trying to find risk, but what they're trying to do is find patterns in the data that can be used for the company to make good decisions, such as better resource allocation, or find patterns that will lead to better marketing strategy. For example, we've all watched movies on Netflix, and if you ever noticed when you watch the movie, Netflix might recommend, hey, you might like X, Y, and Z movie. Similar thing when you shop online, you might have noticed that people who bought this product may also like X, Y, and Z product. As another example, a data scientist may use various programming techniques, various AI techniques to say to sort of uncover patterns in the healthcare arena. For example, they may try and use patterns to see if certain X-ray images show early signs of cancer, perhaps in an attempt to reach out to those patients in a more proactive fashion. So it's more about it's more about individual prediction, whereas actuaries tend to deal more on an aggregate basis, quantify risk on an aggregate basis, and well, they want to be correct, and they want to be correct in aggregate. Data scientists are trying to be more correct at the individual prediction level.
Thank you. I think that's an important distinction
Hopefully
to
that
make.
sort of
Yeah,
helps distinguish between
It
the two.
does. I think if I can just sort of summarize what I've understood, one focus is more on pattern recognition for individuals.
Correct.
And that's how they're able to determine what may be beneficial for that
Yes.
person. And that's how we get those ads, that's how we
Correct.
get, movie recommendations, stuff like that. And on the actuary side, it's more of an aggregate basis where they take, a whole group of people, quantify risk, and then, assign a dollar or premium amount.
Very good. That's
Okay.
correct.
I appreciate you sort of providing that distinction because I think
Thank you, yes.
I can see how things can get confused
Yes,
between the
because
two.
both involve data,
Yes.
both involve quantifying risk, but they both are trying to answer sort of different questions.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, tell me, where do you see yourself in about 10 years or so?
So as I mentioned, typically, when I first started, I was an entry-level analyst, and thankfully I've progressed. Now I am actually a consulting actuary at the company that I work in, and I would still like to continue to progress in my career, and ultimately, hopefully 5-10 years down the road, I would like to see myself as a manager, as a leader, or maybe to put as a senior position in the company that I work for.
That's great to hear. And what I've understood of this field is it actually allows you that possibility. They can actually work your way up.
And that's one of the reasons why I actually chose the profession, because of the career advancement opportunities that it presented with.
That's really good. So, if somebody is trying to become an actuary, we have a student that's thinking about becoming an actuary, what kind of advice would you have for them?
So typically, I would definitely tell them make sure that they get their bachelor's degree, preferably in mathematics or statistics. And after that, during the time when they are in college, or perhaps shortly thereafter, to try and pass at least the first or second examination, so they have at least 1 or 2 exams under their belt. Because most companies these days are looking for candidates who already are passing 1 or 2 exams. And that also sort of helps you to have a sort of a competitive advantage of other candidates who may not necessarily have 1 or 2 exams. As I said, the profession is sort of evolving.
Mm-hmm.
There are new methodologies out there, so I would definitely also encourage students to try and be more proficient at programming. Languages such as R and Python are very useful. Even though they're more useful in the data science world, they could also be very suitable using in the actuarial field as well. In fact, I myself, I'm on the verge of completing my master's in data science, because I like to keep up with new technologies and new skills. So that's something that I'm actually doing.
That's great to hear. I'm glad to see that even with your current position and your advancement in your field, you're still learning and you're still
Yes.
trying to get more.
Yeah, and as I said, even though it's not actuarial exams, most companies will actually pay for you to get your master's and even a PhD if you so wish to pursue one.
Wow, that's very interesting. So I think maybe one of the last questions I may have for you is that, if we were to go back in time, would you still become an actuary, or what would you do?
Yes. So to me, I think the definite answer would be yes, because it sort of fits my profile. It fits the kind of things I like to do. And I may restructure 1 or 2 things. For example, I may have, probably tried to pursue a master's in advance while I was still in college, as opposed to say something now, even though the end result tends to be sort of the same. But that's something that I would probably try and get out more if I had the chance to do. And then sort of take those exams and get a job, and then progress in the exam sense at the job, because most jobs, as I said, do give you study time and the resources needed for you to pass those exams.
Yeah, I think you've pretty much summarized everything that, that's required, so to speak, of being an actuary. So I greatly appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Did you have any final thoughts or words for the audience?
So no, I mean, well, thank you for having me. And I do want to say that, as I said, the exam process is intensive and rigorous. So you may not necessarily pass all the exams in your first attempt, and that's okay. Typically, the company will give you 3 attempts to pass the exams. In fact, they will almost pay for your exam 3 times. And then, after that, you have to sort of pay for yourself. So, because it is expected that these exams are hard. But, I think the key part is don't give up and, persevere. And I think, that's probably one of the key ingredients to becoming fully credentialed.
I think that's great advice right there. And on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to you next time, once these insurance comes out, so that you can advise me on which ones to pick for myself.
I will be happy to help.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so
very
much.
much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank our guests, Brother Mohamedrafik Somji and Brother Sikander Nazerali, for being here with us today. I've gained valuable insights in our conversation, and I hope you have as well. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback, please feel free to email candidhour@orlandocenter.org. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode with medical professionals from our community. Thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.